and welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. I momentarily forgot what this was called. How ridiculous is that? Episode 143. Yes, after 143 episodes, I can still forget what the name of this podcast is. Here we are, live on YouTube, and today we're going to be talking, well, we have 4 images sent in today. We have from Sandra from Birmingham, UK. We have a picture from Janet from Canada, and we have 2 pictures, or a picture from Anne and a picture from Robert, both from Texas. So that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be giving some feedback, and of course we're also going to have live chat. Here we are, live. Leave a comment. Let me know where you are. Let me know where you are in the world. Let me know what the weather's like. Feel free to ask questions as we go. Enjoy the chat. So yes, off to a great start there, completely forgetting what it was I'm supposed to be doing. Like that again, pressing the wrong key. Where am I? I'm completely and utterly losing everything now. Right, hold on, I need to do that. That's what I need to do, yes. There you go, get a little... Oh dear, okay, anyway, here we are, bear with me. Live on YouTube, as you can tell, it's absolutely live. Right, leave me a comment, let me know where you're from. I can see there's a couple of comments in already, let's dive into that, maybe that'll give me a little bit more, ground me a bit more. Yeah, April is here, hello April. April says, hello everyone from a sunny Long Island, New York. Meg says hello everyone. Sandra says hello everyone from a cold and overcast Birmingham. Maggie says hello from a confusing Castle Douglas. Yes, it is rather confusing here. Oh, and Janet's joined us from Mississauga, I think. Anyway, that's in Ontario. Oh no, Ontario, Canada. Right. One way or another, we will get there. Andy says, oh, great, Andy's joined us as well, says, hey, everyone. And Stacey's joined us from Hatboro, Pennsylvania, saying, sunny and cold morning. Anne's joined us from Dallas in Texas. Excellent. Great, okay. And, oh, yeah, Andy's from Hertfordshire in the UK. So, we have people, we have pictures, we have a live stream. So let's make a start. So what are we going to be talking about? So basically today then we're going to be concentrating on 4 images that have been sent in for feedback. So to remember, a wee reminder that this is one of the few corners of the internet where you can actually get genuine feedback on your photos that tactfully, but also in a very positive, safe environment. I've found there's very few places where you can really get the proper feedback. You can put your images up on Facebook or Instagram and you will get likes. Your friends will like it, but your friends aren't necessarily expert photographers. And they're very often your friends are liking it either because they're being friendly, which is great, that's what friends are for, or they're liking it because of the content. You put up a picture of a cat, everybody loves a cat, they click like for the cat, but not necessarily on how well the photo was taken. And we as photographers are always looking for improvement, but we have our own blind spots. And this is where getting a little bit of feedback from somebody who kind of knows what they're talking about is really, really useful. So that's what this corner of the internet was designed for. The whole Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres bit is here to help. So make sure you send me your images and let me know where your sticking points are, what your problems are, and I will do my best to help. And also, if you don't have an image to send in, but you have a particular question to ask about anything photographic, whether it's the technical side of photography, the compositional side of photography, the narrative side of photography, lighting, idea generation, anything like that, then again let me know. Oh, and a quick thing while I remember, next week is in the US, I believe, the clocks are changing. You get your daylight savings thing happen, so your clocks are moving an hour forward. Now we do this in the UK, but not for another 2 weeks after that. So what that means is for likes of Robert and Anne in Texas, or John in Ohio, or Janet in Canada. I think it changes in Canada at the same time. For the following 2 weeks, this will be going out either an hour earlier or an hour later. I haven't figured that one out. Point being, Google it. Check it beforehand. Check it the day before or the day or the morning of. UK time, just to make sure that you don't end up either tuning in an hour early and twiddling your thumbs wondering where I'm at, or tuning in an hour late and finding you've missed the show. So I'll try and remember to remind you of that again at the end of the podcast. Oh, a couple more comments. Robert's here saying howdy all from Texas. I'm glad to see a very happy Chris. Peter says hi from Hunmanby. And is that how you pronounce it? Hunmanby? No, probably a local way of pronouncing it is completely different. April says, I forgot all about that. Stacey says, yes, and it makes me so happy. Or is that the idea that the clock's going forward? Yeah, a little bit more an extra hour of sunlight in the evening, depending on how your day is structured, of course. I do tend to find it does lift my spirits somewhat too. But we've got to wait an extra couple of weeks for that. So, okay, we have people, we have pictures, we have podcast. Let's make a start. So, what I'm going to make a start? Oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. I just managed to minimise that window rather than actually click on it. So where are we going to start? I'm desperate to start. Anne. Let's start with Anne from Texas. Anne sent in this image. Yay, it's come up. And Anne said, I took this image in Paris and I haven't been able to find an edit I like. Specifically, I can't get the crop right or the light right. It just doesn't look interesting, and I don't think the image is reaching its potential. To fix the light issue, I played around with black and white, but I still don't think it works. Suggestions for crop and lighting greatly appreciated. Okay, well, so here we have. I can see why you got drawn to this. There's some really interesting lines. There's obviously clearly the architects had loads of fun creating this building, and I'm sure it looked brilliant in their sketches or paintings and all the rest of it. Maybe it looks great in real life, but when faced with it, so you stand up and you kind of take your photo and somehow trying to get all exactly what you want. You're right, it feels like it's got potential here. So what can we do with it? So anyway, Anne sent me the original, or rather Anne sent me a version. She says, now, you sent me the JPEG of the original. And what I've discovered when playing around with it is there's bits of information, for example, in the clouds that I couldn't quite bring out. If you could have sent me the raw, that makes it a little bit easier, but it doesn't really fully matter. You'll get the general gist of what I'm going to talk about here. So what I want to suggest then, so let's first of all, let's open this up with Photoshop and see, and make a start with what we would do with this. Now again, with the raw, depending on, there might be noise in there. The main problem that we always have with, just to say why it's worth using raw, if you just got your phone and it's not doing anything like that, then don't worry too much. You just, better to get a photo than not get a photo at all. But if your camera has the capability of going raw, then it's worth doing it, because it's particularly on a picture like this, because what happens is we've got bright patch of sky, reflection off the side of the building here, and the rest of this is in shadow. And so the camera has a problem exposing for both the brightness of the sky and the darkness of the shadow. And if you expose for the sky, all this lot gets too dark. And if you expose for the inside of the building part, then the sky tends to blow out. So Anne here's gone for a kind of midway point, getting some of the detail out of the shadows, some of the detail out of the sky, but there's a little bit of a compromise. Now with the JPEG, your camera automatically decides how much of light or dark it's going to do for you, and then fixes it and loses any extra information. But with the raw file, there's quite often extra information, so you can bring out extra detail out of those lost highlights and extra detail out of those lost shadows without necessarily creating massive amount of extra noise or whatever. So the raw file is always that little bit easier to play with. However, we've got the JPEG here. And basically what I'm going to show you here, the main bit where it's going to fall back with the raw is the fact that I couldn't bring out any more detail in the sky that I particularly wanted to. However, let's make a start with this. So my first thought is what you're asking about is, you asked about the crop. And I can see where you're at. It's kind of interesting, but I think really my starting point for the crop is this chunk of sky feels quite big. We've got a large reflective surface here, and I think this top part feels a little bit too dominant, and I feel I just really want to bring that down a bit. I don't think you maybe need this little corner of sky here. We only need to have enough sky to know the sky is there. We don't want to bring it down to there, because then it just seems like a little bit of a patch. So sort of somewhere about halfway down-ish, this kind of part here, just around about there, give or take, right? And then likewise on the bottom, there's not a lot happening down here, so how far up can we come? I think we either cross over this line here, or we maybe just bring it just a little bit down below, say something like that. So we're just keeping in that little bit of kind of window ledge here, but basically the bits that are underneath here are more or less irrelevant. We're not really needing them. Likewise, the bit up at the top. Now, you could probably crop that in again. We could sort of come in about here. That information to the right isn't giving us anything extra. And likewise, you could probably come to about here. We've still got all the interesting bits that we want, but without necessarily adding any extra. So when I do that, I think that's just brought us a little bit closer in. It's got rid of a little bit of extraneous information. So crop-wise then, this is probably where I would start. So next thing to do, what can you do? Now, like all these things, there's a number of different ways you can go. Now, what you did was you went to black and white. Now, one of the things we've got here is it's all kind of white tiles and reflective surfaces and what have you. So in the original drawings, or the day after this was built, I imagine it being very kind of shiny and new and clean. And so you can either kind of go down the bit where what you're really trying to do is emphasize that side of it, or if we kind of look in at the moment here, this is now not a new building. There are wet patches, there are bits of decay, there's bits of aging, so there's a sort of slightly more kind of grunginess to it. And I think you can generally go in either direction with something like this. So first of all, let's play with that idea of a sort of slightly cleaner version. So if I just duplicate that, and for quickness, I'm just going to leap into Camera Raw. But again, I mean, if you've got Lightroom, this does similar kind of things. And I think kind of you're right, maybe black, or if we're talking about the notion of shape and tone, going sort of semi-abstract really with it, rather than going for a kind of realism, then well, yeah, may as well desaturate. So we just knock the saturation down there. Then what we can do is we want to maybe bring the shadows up, make it a little bit brighter, maybe bring that exposure up. Now, of course, at this point, we have lost the sky. If I take the highlights down, there's a little bit of sky there, but it's kind of struggling a bit. Maybe I would edit the sky separately, but just for sort of speed's sake, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the shadows up a bit. In fact, actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the contrast, and I'm going to take the contrast down. And what happens now is everything starts to smooth out. In fact, actually, even with the detail, I would maybe even do a little bit of noise reduction there. And everything's kind of becoming very smooth. So if I then kind of open that, we end up with this kind of idea. Now, what I might then do is just see what the levels are doing. The levels, and what I find is I've lost all the blacks, and I just drag that slider on the left over towards the right a bit, and you've kind of got something like that. Maybe I could actually take the brightness levels thing here. I could even up the brightness a bit more, but also up the contrast a bit more if I wanted, and make it sort of more heavily black and white. Although some of the kind of, you get curves of shadows coming in here. You kind of by going down with the contrast, you end up with a much smoother set. You know, the tonal difference between here and here is, let me show you. If I click on the color picker, if I click on the shade, so I need to cancel, I need to go back to here for the moment. If I select this shade here, we can see the grey selection is there, and if I click it here, it's not really gone down very far. Whereas if I take the contrast and I boost the contrast the other way, then if I pick the color picker, the difference between, sorry, go back on that layer so it knows where to pick from, that is there, but then this leaps down quite a bit further. There's a much more noticeable difference between those two shades. So if you're wanting to have that kind of smooth, almost ignoring the light, then you kind of decontrast and then play with the levels a little bit, just to kind of bring the blacks back in. So that, and then, like I say, what you can do, you can then, if you want, just kind of up the exposure even more. We run the risk of maybe losing a bit of detail up here. Right, we could even take that right up like that, and then perhaps in the mask, drop that down to, I don't know, 20%, 20% thereabouts, and then just very lightly, so turn that black, just paint a little bit of that back in, just to get that little bit of detail back in from that corner. But that then is kind of giving you this kind of clean white building effect. So that's one way you can go about it, Anne. Other options, what have we got here? Let's tell you what, let's not lose that completely. Let's just take that, shove that in a group and remove it. So if we go back to this now, if I then hit J, so I'm duplicating the thing here, and what we're going to do is we're going to go in different directions. I'm going to go to Camera Raw Filter, and we're going to keep it in colour now. Maybe I will up the noise reduction a bit because I'm going to be playing more harshly with it, which will bring more noise in. So I'm kind of creating a baseline here to sort of mitigate some of that before I start. And now if I decide I want to take the contrast, and I boost now, I've taken the contrast, I boost the shadow up a little bit. You know, kind of play around with the art. But what I'm going to do here as well, actually, what if I do auto? Let's go auto, see what that does first of all. And that's sort of playing around a bit. But now what I want to do from the auto is I want to take the contrast. And we're really going to create a stronger difference between that. And you see what's happening here actually. This little kind of golden reflection of light is starting to kind of come into play a little bit as well. And it's quite a nice little patch there. I quite like that. We take the contrast up. And then let's go to the clarity. And let's going to go boom with the clarity and kind of really whack that up somewhat. Maybe bring that exposure down a little bit, boost that clarity up a little bit more, bring those blacks up a touch, maybe boost the whites, a little bit of play around, take that contrast up, something like that. And now, look at that, we've gone from that to that. And now that has a very different kind of sense of depth. If we go back and we'll look at what we were looking at before, this is your kind of, your black and white, smoothed out, no sense of, you know, you're looking for the cleanliness, you're looking for smoothness, you're looking for, it's about line, it's about all about geometry, this version of it. This version is much more grunge, really. It's all the stains, and what have you have come out in it, but we've also kind of got much more in the way of contrast. Now I've lost again some of the texture in the sky. I would maybe want to separately go to the sky and draw more of the blues and the textures out, which if I had the raw file could maybe do, or even replace the sky with something if necessary. But this little gold patch is showing up, but we've also got so much more texture in here, and for me this feels more like kind of one of those dystopian future sci-fi movies, you know, where we sort of, you know, 30 years from now society is broken down, everything just looks that bit more grungy. So actually it's very, very different kind of feel. So with a lot of these things, so much depends on where you want to take it. Do you want to take it into a kind of the original architect's vision, because this I can imagine being completely on a kind of architect's sketch, or do you want to go down that kind of dystopian sci-fi future? So playing around with the sliders, I think makes a difference. The other part of that, of course, was talking about the crop, and that was just about coming a little bit closer, where you go, what isn't really needed in this photo? What can I get rid of? And sometimes with that, you just kind of keep cropping in until you go, actually, I've lost something, come back out again. So play with that until you kind of get to a point where you feel, actually, I prefer the balance of that. So I hope that helps, Anne. Thanks very much for sending it in. I thought it was a really interesting photo, and I'm not surprised at all that it grabbed your attention as a place to stand. And I hope that gives you a couple of ideas of maybe what you could do with the photo. Right, we have comments. Where are we? April says, very nice and creative. Stacey says, interesting lines. I do agree, nice shapes. Anne says that crop looks great. Oh, Ernst Wenzel has joined us from Berlin. Hello, Ernst. Lovely, lovely that you could make it. Welcome. Sandra says that that crop makes such a difference. Meg says, I really like the diagonals on the side of the building in the photo. April says, that looks nice. I don't know at what point you said that, but... Robert says, I wonder if you could highlight the contrast between the decay on the left versus the clean of the building on the right. Again, I suppose what you could do is just start separate editing with that, kind of mask, just edit one side one way, the other side another way, and then kind of blend them together using masking. April says, wow, cool. Maggie says, I love the tonal texture and form. Anne says, thanks, Kim, excellent suggestions. Robert says, great advice on how to find the story in a photo. I have similar struggles in some of my shots. Andy says, looks great with a high contrast grunge. And Sandra says, I think I prefer the colour version, but it was interesting to see the difference between the black and white and the colour. Excellent. Yeah, and I think that's kind of a point, Sandra. I think it's a good point, is that sometimes it is worth taking a photo and see if you can edit your photo in two entirely different ways. And even if you kind of were already favouring one before you started, I think you can quite often learn an awful lot if you decide to edit your photo to give it a different kind of story. Sometimes you will surprise yourself and find a more interesting edit by going in a different direction in a way you weren't expecting. But even if you don't, sometimes going in the opposite direction then kind of gives you more idea of going back in the different direction the way you want it. And this is part of the problem that we have, is we are often not quite sure where to go. So it's worth sometimes trying out 2, maybe even 3 different options before you and then that might help get you to feel, okay, now I know what it is I want. Okay, Anne says, I'm going to explore the grunge. Wasn't something I considered, but I can see where the potential is. Excellent. Well, if you do get round to finishing editing it, do let me know. I'd love to see how it turns out, Anne. Right, okay, thank you. Let's move on then. Let's move on to Janet. So, Janet, yes. So, Janet sent me this photo, which I thought was really quite fun. Says, this is an image I do like, but feel like it could be better. I was trying to play with the reflections of the notes in the keys of the piccolo. This is something I can try reshooting, not just change the editing. Oh, sorry, meant to show you this one. Yes, here we are, busy telling you about the photo. Show, let me see. So what we have here is Janet has sent me the image. And we can see we've got a piccolo. The piccolo is sitting on some sheet music, and rather nicely we've got this little bit of sheet music. We've got this. We've got the part of it reflecting the actual notes sitting in there, and I think that's quite fun. So options here. Janet's feeling like she feels it could be done better. What else could she do with it? Now, Janet did send me the raw file, which makes it slightly easier for me. So this is the raw file, and now when I zoom in, what I do become quite aware of is it's quite noisy. This now I don't know what kind of camera you're using, Janet. ISO 800. It also doesn't feel like it's fully in focus. I think that's really part of it. More than the noise, actually, is the sense that it doesn't fully feel in focus. It feels like it's... Now, this is... You've done F11 at half a second. Now, I'm hoping at half a second you weren't hand-holding it. At half a second, you could be... you'd want it on a tripod. But if you had it on a tripod or sitting on a surface, half a second is slow enough such that the actual click, when you press the camera, that you can actually create a wobble in the camera. So... you could be slightly out of focus. If that's the case, when you're going down to something like half a second, even if you're on a tripod, unless you have a remote release, which isn't actually touching the camera, I would suggest the idea, put it on a 2-second timer. I do this all the time. The camera's on a tripod or resting on a wall, but if it's a long exposure, certainly if I'm dropping down to something like less than probably 1/10 of a second, very often what I will do, I'll set it on a 2-second timer so that when I go click, the camera's had 2 seconds to stop wobbling from the actual action of me pressing it, and then it tends to be a much sharper photo. So I suspect there's just been a hint of that with this. So that will kind of immediately get you, technically will get you a slightly sharper photo. Now, web size, you're not really noticing it, but if you were to blow this up to a print size, you would really notice that the focus wasn't fully there. Okay, that aside, Generally speaking, I tend to feel this is, you've got a, there's a kind of a tilt, but not quite. I think a diagonal, a stronger diagonal, is like is one way to go. It might be a case of you turning, if you're looking for other ideas, turn the piccolo slightly, shoot maybe slightly along the length, give it a, not directly down it, although that's another idea to play with as well, but at a kind of 45 degrees or 30 degrees or something like that, length of shooting down, and see what that does. And again, play around with where the music is, where the reflection is. Another option to consider here is the idea of, it looks like you've got the piccolo sitting on some kind of stand. It's a black stand here, and that's allowing this part here to reflect the music. And it's starting to a little bit here, but it's starting to run out a bit. But actually, if you were to tilt it a fraction, just maybe put a couple of sheets of paper, a little bit of card underneath the stand from behind, and tilt the piccolo forward a touch, then actually you might find that you could play around with some of this sheet music and actually get more of these notes being reflected in different parts as well. So those are two potential options for playing around with the composition, or just with that piccolo. One, tilting it slightly forward, and another maybe angling it to get a kind of more of a diagonal, which will give you kind of a sort of stronger sense of, we talked before about the notion of diagonals are where the energy is. Diagonal is where the sense of movement and drive and energy. So something like that to play with. Alternatively, if you want to make it much more passive, then straighten that horizon and have it and focus on your horizontals and verticals. But having said that, music we tend to think of as movement. Music happens through time and the notes go up and down, especially here where we've got triple crotchets, and it looks like a very fast piece of music here. So doing something where you kind of introduce a bit more diagonal into the piccolo, I think would help with that sense of liveliness. So anyway, but because there is a bit of noise with this, let's just go into the detail and just sort of play with the noise reduction a little bit. So we end up with this, and you see, if we tilt, and like I say, if you really want to, you can kind of straighten it, something like that. That kind of makes it a little bit more passive in that sense. And you probably don't need as much to the top here. You can probably bring that down again, just enough to know that you've got the echoes of the line up there. And then if you're not wanting it too widescreen, I think you've pulled it into that part, and maybe you bring it into there, depending on if you're wanting these bits, something like that perhaps. So that's one way of going about it. Otherwise, like I say, I think maybe you make a point of creating a diagonal rather than creating a horizontal. But these are two different ways. Now, once you've got this, I think part of the playing, and in a way you've already done this, but let me show you. I'll duplicate the layer. This has got a whole sort of slight yellow shift to it. And when I look at your original, you've taken it to a blue shift. Now, if I just filter, camera raw filter, here, and then we go to the basic here, and we do a kind of shift to the left. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to shift it slightly further than you had, so we are definitely getting blue into the paper, but not so much that it's blue, but just into a kind of sense of blue like that. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to create another layer underneath here, and I'm actually going to nudge it a little bit more into the yellow. So if I go to filter, camera raw filter again, and then just nudge the temperature over to the right. So the gold brass kind of the yellowness of the metal here is highlighted a fraction more. And then what I do is I come back into here and mask this top layer, the blue layer, so that if I then have this as black, have that at full opacity, what I can do if I want is then paint the gold side of this back in. Now I'm just going to do this very quickly. You could take a lot longer to do it. Make sure you get the Now, what happens, really what we're talking about here, is that notion of the blue and the yellow are sort of complementary or opposite colours, so they kind of, it stops the whole thing feeling a bit more monochrome. If I can just come in here a bit and just, where I've overlaid, I just go back to white, and then I can kind of crop that back in. Now, you can do proper selecting, masking off, and all the rest of it. But the thing is what we've done here is you've now, it really kind of makes the gold and the foreground and the background really leap out of each other. Now, we've just seen me do blue shifts and yellow shifts, so it probably feels more exaggerated. Somebody who hasn't seen that will just sort of see this, and it will see it as a very kind of bright instrument. Now, if I merge those two together into a new layer, then at that point, what we can do is perhaps we can maybe give it just a touch of a vignette, just to kind of darken down those corners, bring the attention in, and then maybe create a touch of clarity, something like that, just to kind of boost that sense. And I think you're going to kind of feel that it's leaping off the page just a little bit more. It allows it to kind of stand out a touch more. Another thing you might want to do is, in terms of a kind of dodge and burn, is if we just want to darken down these little blacks a bit. So if I go to the burn tool, I've currently got this on shadows, say 5%, something like that. And then I just start painting over these a little bit. I think these reflections of the notes are beautiful. Without a doubt, this is where part of the strength of this picture lies, is getting these the wonderful the score, the manuscript reflecting in the instrument. So we just want to try to draw a little bit more attention to that. So you can see it's subtle, but it makes a difference. So again, depending on the camera you're using, I see it looks like a 105mm lens. I'm guessing that's maybe a macro lens you've got. I don't know how close you can get in, but there's elements whereby you could maybe even sort of play around with a composition more like this, where you just, forget the rest of it, just kind of come in really close. But certainly at this point, you've got to make sure it's sharp. So make sure it's focused in the right place, but also if you are doing this longer exposure, maybe because you don't have much light, do that 2-second timer thing. So a couple of suggestions there on how you might compose it differently and how you might edit and play with the edit. So I hope you find that useful, Janet. Thank you for sending in the image. Right. Stacey says, nice musical composition. Janet says, I think it was the D300 and on a tripod. I did try at different times. And yes, I do use a timer. Not sure if I did on this image. Okay. Glad you know that one. Right. April says, I love the reflection idea. So does Anne. Janet says, it was just on the table. The black is the body of the piccolo. Okay, so that is actually the body. So maybe, again, you can just tuck something slightly underneath if you want to tilt it a bit more. And Sandra thinks the colour shift really enhances the photo. Excellent. Right, okay, so quick reminder then that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting or entertaining and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Another thing to do is invite your friends along. Spread the word. Let everybody know that this place exists. We're actually coming up to 3 years since I began these podcasts. So we haven't achieved global domination just yet, but we need more people to know about us, right? Okay. Right, okay, let's move on then. I'm now going to go to Sandra. So Sandra said, attached is this photo of my great nephew, which I took outside last October on an overcast, part sunny day. I was really pleased with how his blue eyes came out in the photo, but I have no idea exactly what the lighting was like, and I want to be able to recreate the effect with a better facial expression. Any advice on this and anything else related to photographing in natural light would be gratefully received. So I asked a little bit more, because there's something about this. You talk about natural light, and yet there's something about the quality of this which doesn't feel like it's outside at all. It's got that feeling of like being inside almost like a play tent or something, or like a softbox in itself. That it feels like there's a diffuse light all round. There's not a There's not a single source light. The light is being bounced around from all directions. So there's the shadows are soft. So I then did ask Sandra if she could remember anything more about the lighting setup, and she said Teddy, I presume your wee boy, here says, was sitting outside on a bench with the gold reflector behind him. So this reflector here, then that's what's kind of creating this sort of strong yellow light. As I'd given up at this point trying to bounce natural light into the kids' faces, as Teddy's older sister wouldn't sit still for 5 seconds. Yeah, I can understand. Yeah, kids, that's true. If you have any tips that you've learned from your experience photographing children, that could be useful as well. Because I'm sure I will be photographing them for a good few years to come. Well, yeah, photographing children. It is very difficult. Small children are very restless and don't want to sit still. So actually, my advice is to not try to get them to do so. One of the best lessons I ever learned quite early on in my photographic career, a friend of mine had 2 boys and she wanted to have a family photo. And she said, but there's just no way they will ever sit still long enough for a photo. But she really wanted it. So when we were talking about it, said, well, why don't we just kind of go down to the beach? Let's just let them charge about. And what we did was we did that for the afternoon. We went down to the beach, let them charge about. I photographed them running about all over the place, throwing stones in the water, trying to build sandcastles. And periodically, they kind of got tired. There was a point where they both got a bit tired and they went and sat on the rocks and snuggled in with their mum, got a wee cuddle. And I got some beautiful photos of them cuddling in with their mum once they sort of burnt off a whole load of energy. But they were there for 2 minutes and then they were up again. But I also got some beautiful shots of them throwing stones into the water and charging about. And I think if you can take photos of kids being kids, charging about, then that's the way to go. Now, you will take thousands of photos and most of them will be unusable because they will have turned their head just at the point you thought you had something lined up. They will leap out of where you focused and so suddenly it's focused on the rock behind them. But do it anyway. Because you're not trying to capture thousands of photos of them, you're trying to capture a handful of really lovely photos of them. And if you're with them all afternoon, you will capture some beautiful photos. So as much as anything, go out and about. Go to the play park. Go to the beach. Go to the forest. Even in the garden, if you've got a sand pit or on the grass or in a yard, playing in a tray of mud or something, or dirt, this kind of thing. Allow kids to be kids and photograph them being kids. And I think you'll probably find you get some far better photos, not just better quality photos, but more engaging photos than trying to go for that formal kind of school photograph thing where everybody's sort of sitting there with their hair patted down and trying to smile for the camera. I think it's just soul destroying trying to do that, and kids don't really want to sit there doing that. So kind of why bother? Unless you've really got something in your head you desperately want that, but you might have to wait till they're about 7 or 8 years old and bribe them with large amounts of chocolate before you can get them to do that. So that would tend to be my suggestion for that. Back to this, recreating the light. I mean, it's difficult to know. One of the things that is often worth doing is where if you've got a setup that you're quite pleased with, either step back and take an overall shot so you can see the setup you've got, or even whip out your phone and take a quick shot of the setup. So if you've got lights or reflectors or a particular setup and you think I might want to ever recreate this in the future, take a photo of it so that you can remind yourself of what you were doing. Now the only real clue that I've got here is the eyes. Now if I move in, the eyes are reflecting a certain amount, and I'm guessing probably this figure here on the left could well be you with the camera, but we can see the sky behind. But there's kind of a, I'm not sure where, is this curve here, is that just the top of his eyelids kind of creating the shadow? This is why I must admit I originally thought you were in like kind of some small play tent or something, because I thought this looks more like like an entrance, kind of like the bit where the zip door from it. But essentially it looks like you've got most of the light behind you. So you've got light behind you, you've got this reflector. The gold reflector is bouncing the light and creating this kind of yellow cast on it. It's also, you're picking up quite a few of the wrinkles, which you might have to kind of, are a little bit distracting. Beyond that, I think really, in order to recreate this, it looks like you find the bench again, stick the reflector behind him again, go out on a dull day or a sunny day allow the sun to go behind the clouds and try again, really. But having said that, I think for the most part, get down onto ground level. Let Teddy move around on the ground. Let him play with things. Get on the grass, go on the stones, in the sand, in the mud, whatever else it is, and kind of get down to his level and take photos and crawling around and playing with the camera. And I think those kind of more naturalistic photos you will probably find much more engaging. So I don't know how much help I've really been there. Maybe giving you a few suggestions, but hopefully it gives you some ideas there anyway. Where are we? April. So I know 3 years went fast. That's chatting about the fact that we're coming up to 3 years for this podcast. Andy says that's a cracking facial expression. And April says great advice on kids and photography. Excellent. Right. So, excuse me. What I'm going to do now is move on to Robert. So, Robert sent in, where are we? This is Robert's edited photo here, which has certainly got an amount of drama to it. And Robert says, I took this photo a while back and I just got round to editing it. It is very monochrome, although it is a colour photo, but it's just got a very kind of grey feel to it. And I'm thinking of playing with it in black and white. However, I wanted your take on it first. Let me know what you think and what I can do to make the story come alive. Okay, so I think this is a really interesting. I don't know where this is. I'm imagining it's sort of there's a plate, some kind of sculpture, theme park, something or other. So what we have then is we have this, what probably, it's either concrete or metal, comes up and then curves around. So it's a very almost scorpion tail, kind of quite a dramatic, solid man-made structure going up into an incredibly textured, beautiful sky behind it. And from the dark patch down here to the kind of lighter patches up here, there's a very, very dramatic sky. So it is quite, as you say, quite a monochrome, and I can see why you want to go black and white. So I was looking at this. But anyway, Robert sent me the raw photo. So let me just find that. And what we can do here is see what we've got. Open the raw photo. Now, hold on a sec. No, not that one. Ha! Just giving away what I was doing with my own my own edits. Let's come back to this. Here, what we're wanting is the raw, which is this one. This is Robert's original photo. So let's talk you back through and how I got to the other one that I was just showing you. So here we go. We've got 100 ISO, f22, 100th of a second. So f22, you're obviously looking to get it sharp all the way through, so that this is sharp. Also, the background is sharp. f22 at 100th of a second. Personally, I'd have probably gone down to something like an f18 or f16, which I think will also give you sharp all the way through, and maybe gone up to 160th of a second. But then, at least for me, that means I've got less worry about camera wobble. 100th of a second, I'm always slightly worried about whether I'm going to get it slightly out of focus just from my own hand thing. But that's a smaller side. Let's zoom in, and because this is the raw file, it automatically tends to sharpen it. So I'm going to I tend to feel oversharpened, but boost the noise reduction a bit, because again I'm planning on playing with this a little bit more. So we'll go with that, and also just so that I don't lose too much detail afterwards, I'm going to pull the highlights down so that I've got that. I don't think I need to go up any more in the shadows. We can see up in the histogram that there's not a lot up in there anyway. And let's just open this file first. Now, so what you've obviously done with your version here, Robert, is you've kind of cropped out the you've cropped out that bit, and then you've cropped out that bit. And that kind of takes you to a sort of rule of thirds bit, which is, not a bad start. For me, what I tend to feel is this kind of comes up and it curves around. The top of the curve is getting lost a bit here. But that's okay. We're going to play around with that in a little while. But first of all, is this feeling of there's a curve here, but I feel there's a room here for more dramatic curve. And what I want to do is I want to tilt this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this round a little bit. Now, okay, let's do a content aware because I don't want to lose too much of this. And what I want to do is something more like that. I want to create a more dramatic line. Remember we were talking earlier about the notion of diagonals create energy, a far stronger energy. I mean, if this is absolutely upright like that, it feels very flat and non-moving. When we kind of tilt it, we get much more of a kind of energy drive out of it. Now, how much you tilt it, I think it's one of these things where you're kind of moving it backwards and forwards until something feels about right. And I'm going to do something like that, I think. Kind of feels somewhere for me is around where I want. Now, interesting, I think last week, Robert, I mentioned something about horizon. You mentioned the idea of Dutch tilt. I wasn't fully thinking about what you were talking about. But what I would, afterwards, when I was sort of thinking about it, I suddenly realised, no, the whole point of tilt, if your horizon isn't straight, is that if you can go for tilt, absolutely have a tilted horizon, but what you've got to do is make sure it's deliberately tilted. You need to be above more than about a 20-degree tilt so that it looks like you, when it's only you've got to tilt it 1 or 2 degrees, it just looks like you didn't straighten the horizon. And when anybody looks at it, it just feels slightly uncomfortable. So the point is, if you're going to tilt the horizon, then make sure you do a dramatic or a noticeable, doesn't have to be really dramatic, but at least 20 degrees, I think, if you're going to deliberately have the tilt. Anyway, that's going back to answering you from last week. This one, I quite like that angle. Maybe, yeah, just a fraction more, something like that. Now I'm going to use content aware just to kind of fill in the clouds around it. And I've got a funny little mark just there. So I will just take that patch and drag it over there. So we've now got this shape, which I think personally has much more kind of appeal to it. So what can we do with this? Now, I want to kind of really go in and play with the contrast, I think. So let's duplicate that layer and we'll go to camera raw and see what happens when I grab the contrast and I pull that. Oh, that makes it interesting. Now, the highlights get too bright. So let's drag the exposure. Oh, that's kind of fun. Let's drag that exposure down. Now, look how much dramatic that is making. That's kind of making everything really full-on drama there. And I like that. I think that's really creating something a little bit more special. Now, we've got to be careful here about the highlights kind of becoming too bright, but we're just right on the edge of it here. But what I might also do with this, I think, is I like this. Now we've kind of played with the contrast a bit more. One of the things I've become much more aware of is this sort of bright patch here, which is catching some kind of reflected light. We've also got a slight problem with the fact that the tip is getting lost up here. And I've just noticed some little speck up there, which I'm just going to remove. Probably a bird flying past. But we're going for clean lines here, so I will just get rid of anything that looks like it's interfering with that. Oh, there's another one, something flying past. It might be a mosquito in the foreground, who knows. Anyway, what we've got here is back to this. So at this point, I'm quite tempted to do a little bit of dodge and burn as well. So I'm going to duplicate this just so we can compare the layers afterwards. And if I go to the dodge tool, now I've got the dodge tool set to midtones at around 5%. 5% allows me to kind of play a little bit more with it. So I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to start brightening up this patch a little bit. I'll also do a little run along there. Now, maybe not, be slightly careful there. And that kind of makes that stand out a little bit more. And what I might do as well, I think, is, now I'm going to have to sort of do, I'm going to try and lighten this corner a fraction. I want to be careful. I don't want to kind of lose too much. Have I overdone it? Just play with it a little bit. But what I'm then also going to do here is I'm maybe going to take the burn tool and shadows, maybe might have to do the midtones with that as well. So here we're kind of running a little bit. I'm going to up that to 21 and just a quick touch around the edge of that bit of sky here. Maybe 21's too strong. Let's go down to 13 there, see what that does. That's better. So a very quick kind of over that, and then let's flip back from the burn to the dodge, so I can just kind of pull that back in there. And so really what I've done now, if we just compare that to the layer underneath, is I've just allowed the tip of that to kind of feel like it's still in the picture rather than getting lost into the light patch. Do you see it? It's brought it back into play that little bit more. Now what I'll do, I'll just duplicate that once more, and let's go and take this back into Camera Raw, and I'll play a little bit more. Let's add a little bit of a vignette to it, because I want some of these corners here to just kind of darken down a little. So I'll kind of pull that in. I don't want to go too far, but you kind of want to bring it in a bit. And again, we're kind of adding more drama to it, which I really like. And then what can we do? Contrast again. That's kind of overkill, maybe. Well, maybe a little bit. Let's take the clarity tool. What is the clarity? Oh, yeah. Clarity's really killing it. So I'm just going to whack that up. Maybe take that, no, not the whole exposure. I like the exposure up, but I'm going to take those highlights down a fraction at the top there, just so I'm not losing them. And maybe touch that a little bit more. Be careful here, don't pull a little bit out of the shadow. And now we've gone to that. Now the final thing to do, one of these things we've already talked with you in previous weeks, Robert, is to make sure that the levels are going to be right. So we pull up the levels, and what we find is we can actually drop that down a little bit more. We can take it full down to the blacks, don't have to, but maybe take it closer. We can still do that, and we've got room here to maneuver. There's a bit of a patch here. I can pull that up, brighten it, but there is some information there, and that information is this bit up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mask this top part and just allow where it's got overbright at the top, just to make sure that that doesn't get blown out. And you can see here the levels come back, so I can now just drag that up to the corner there, and that sits a little bit more comfortably. And I can do that a little bit more there, and there we go. So at this point then, here's your finished article. So if I just group those together, then what we can see is that's from the first crop, and there at that point, hey, I think we have award-winning photo stuff there. Certainly I think if you put something like that into some of the competitions, it's maybe going to be a little bit more energy grabbing. Does it need to be black and white? At this point, you know, I really quite like those silvery blue hue to it. If we let's put that into black. If we were to just straightforwardly hue saturation, desaturate, well, it's okay, but I still like that color in it. If we did the more kind of dramatic black and white, yeah, again, interesting, but I still like the hue. And even for that matter, if we go back to the hue saturation and I was to color shift, because this is blue, if I just drag this master slider, what you'll find is you can make it sort of a bit more purple, into pinks, into browns. In fact, you know, if I boosted the saturation, you could make it really red, quite post-apocalyptic, or you can kind of greens and things like that. For all that, we can run through the whole slider, but in the end I find I keep coming back to where we started. This kind of natural kind of blue grey drama really does it for me. That's so I wouldn't really feel the need to colour shift, but the option is there if you wanted it. So I hope you're happy with that one, Robert. Certainly I really like it like this, but the key things here is you've got to be careful about this tip. This tip can get lost very easily. Another option, if you're wanting to kind of make sure, is to do is to actually select. That's doing a really funny select. but maybe, you know, play around with it a little bit. Make sure you kind of select the area that you want. And then that way, if you're wanting to sort of highlight some part of it and darken another bit, you won't necessarily end up, you know. So now I've got that. If I wanted to, say, do the burn tool on the midtones, if I select, if I now create a mask, I'm not wanting to do that the other way, because I'm going to invert mask, and then I can darken down. What's going on? Wrong, looking at the wrong one. I can. Is that darkening? No, it isn't. I've done something. What am I supposed? What am I trying to do here? Let's go back to here. That's what I'm trying to do. Select inverse, and now I can something. Where are we going? Let's just whack that up. Is that doing anything? It's not. Ah, that's because the group. No? Yeah, that's because I'm on the wrong one. Let's go to here. That's why nothing's happening here. I'll do that. You see, now if I want, I can really darken all that down as much as I like, but it's not actually affecting that. However, be aware that if I am doing that, and then I remove the mask, that now we have this sort of funny, hard line. So you'd have to play around with feathering. You'd have to be careful with it. I've overdone it there, but just to kind of prove the point. So point being here, though, is that just darkening this bit around the tip to make sure that that tip doesn't get lost. But so hopefully then that gives you that kind of massive drama. And I think really, to go back also, notion that tilt, I think that notion of it, that just exaggerating the diagonal so that it curves back round into the picture, makes it particularly interesting. Right, hope you found that one useful, Robert. Fun photo that. I think you had the right kind of eye to see that there was something there in the first place. Okay, so we have a few more comments on this one. Right, Sandra says, thanks, Kim. I will try and put your suggestions into action when I get to photograph the kids again. I'm glad a couple of you liked the "don't mess with me" facial expression. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was a really fun expression on the face there. That's not one you can capture very easily, very often. Robert says it's the spire of the Air Force Memorial in Washington, D.C., near the Pentagon. April says, I like the clouds in it. Sandra says, great sky in this photo. Maggie says, what a beautiful curve. Meg says, very dramatic sky, and I really love the curve in this photo. April says, I forgot about the tilting technique. I like it. Robert says, good advice on the Dutch angle or tilt. I was kidding about it last week. Seems like all my photos are not level. And goes on and says, the spec was bugs. I see them in other shoots, in other shots. And Robert also agrees with the angle shift. It does make the image more interesting. Sandra says, wow, the processing really makes a difference. April says, great dramatic edit of the sculpture. Robert says, your edits are very dramatic. I was fortunate that the clouds were cooperative that day. Yeah, you really were. I mean, that was fantastically dramatic clouds, that. I really like them. And also Robert agrees that it's better in colour. April says, I love the natural look of... I love the natural look the best photo. I love the natural look the best too. Right, okay. And Robert says, for the tip, I found that if I burn at a 1 to 3 pixel area on the edge of the spire, it creates a more micro contrast to the background to help bring it out a bit more. Yep, and I believe that your tilt is a Dutch tilt. Right, okay. Well, that's pretty much us. So next week, I will. There's a space for about another 3 or 4 pictures to send in. Send in your images, send in your questions. This is the place to improve your understanding of photography. So I can't do that unless you send me your images. But great set of images. Nothing's kind of off topic here as long as it's photography related. Yeah, make sure you send them in. And if you are finding these podcasts useful, interesting, or entertaining, then do consider supporting them with buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. If you want to send me your images, then I have a Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. You can put them in there, or you can email them to me, kim@kimayres.co.uk. Anything else to say before we disappear? I think that's pretty much about it. Also, if you have any thoughts, ideas, things you would like to sort of see in these podcasts, then let me know. Right, last couple of comments there of people saying thank you and see you next week and what have you. And yeah, hopefully see you all next week. And yeah, have a good week and send your images in. Cheerio. Bye-bye.